an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering What We Do in the Shadows, Season 1 finale, Episode 10, Ancestry. In this episode, we find out that Guillermo's ancestry does not necessarily preclude him entirely from becoming a vampire, but it seems like maybe it's going to make it a little bit more difficult. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashley for commissioning this episode. I need to mention that this season is no longer available on Hulu. I had to buy this episode for $2 on Amazon Prime because I guess I watched this episode initially on Hulu with Owen a couple weeks ago. So it definitely got taken off Hulu really, really recently. And I was so annoyed because it wasn't like paying for something because you need to watch it is one thing. Paying for it because you need to re-watch it when you watched it for free the first time, that really gets me salty. But there it is. That's the way Hulu works with certain like currently running shows, is that it only lets them keep the most recent stuff on there. And if you come into the show a little bit too late, there is no place to find the first seasons without paying. So I just wanted to put that warning out there for anybody who isn't aware of what's going on with that. I am, at the same time as that irritates me, it is kind of lovely that this is happening because the show is still running, because it is being renewed. I don't know if the fourth season, like if that got picked up. I just think that the third season just wrapped, if I'm not mistaken. But I am very pleased that the show is getting as many seasons as it is. I think that there's a real unfortunate tendency for things that are excellent to be canceled too soon before they get a chance to find their footing. And this show has found its footing already, in my opinion, so I don't even think it would fall under that category. But I'm always so prepared for good shit to get canceled, because it just feels like unless you appeal to every demographic specifically, and you're not lined up to succeed, it's frustrating. Kyle says, I believe season 4 is confirmed to be happening. All right, well, here's hoping that I get through season 2 fast enough that it's still free on Hulu by the time I'm done. We'll see. So this episode just came with a lot of really fun surprises. We start off with Guillermo talking about how he feels like he is more of a Renfield than he is an Armand, which was what he was hoping to be. And he talks about the loneliness of it in this intro. When my master's asleep, the house gets quiet. When he's awake, I'm always awake. So, you know, and we see him a variety of different, like, bits of pathos, I feel is the right word. He is writing in his journal all of these like names that he could potentially be known by, and they're all written next to an illustration of himself that is not how he looks. And I'm really curious about this because it seems like Guillermo believes that this is going to be a Twilight-esque situation where once you get transformed into a vampire, you also become like the hottest version of yourself that you could be. It seems like most people just look like who they were. And this was something that I think I talked about with Rashawn, and perhaps even with Miles when we covered Twilight, was that like, if I was offered, eternal youth, I like, and to, you know, remain unchanging throughout the ages, I can think of no better motivator to get in shape than the knowledge that I will be stuck with that body and unable to change it for the rest of my life. Because I think a lot of us operate under this assumption that, like, well, I'll always have time. At some point, I'll get around to taking better care of myself and getting into better shape, maybe dropping some weight. And so we managed to go half our lives thinking that we still have time. But if you get, like, faced with the fact that you're going to be transformed, it's simultaneously rather freeing, because a lot of the reason that I've sort of stopped trying to lose weight is that there are no studies that you can lose weight and actually keep it off permanently. No studies indicate that that happens. Everybody regains it, and usually your metabolism gets altered and you regain even more than you lost because your body is trying to compensate. But if you're being turned into a non-human creature, you don't have to worry about the weight regain because you'll be frozen in time. So you could lose the weight and then get stuck in that shape. And that feels like a pretty solid deal to me. So what I'm saying is, I would be, if I were like hoping to any day be transformed into a vampire, I think I would be being pretty obsessive about my appearance in a way that is probably unhealthy, but also would make sense for the situation. Guillermo has an illustration in this book that looks like Antonio Banderas. And I just want to be like, babe, first of all, at a very basic level, you got to grow your hair out. You've got short, curly hair. It doesn't seem like you can do anything with that once you're transformed. I don't know. Maybe you can. But it just looks nothing like him. And yet he's writing all of these like potential names that he's got for himself. We have Guillermo the Terrifying, Guillermo the Merciless, Guillermo of the Dark, I think it says, or the Shadow, Guillermo el Diablo, Guillermo the Great. It just says Mr. Williams at one point, which I found really funny. He says, I sometimes wonder what my life would be like if I was still at Panera Bread. I'd probably be a manager and I'd get to boss other people around for a change and be able to sleep and have health insurance and friends. And then we get to watch him dismember the bodies of the victims. I was so grateful to get to watch this, because this was the shit I was wondering about. I think from the first episode, I was kind of like, so what do they do with the people that, like, you know, that's the thing when you're not a being that eats people, like their flesh, whole. You're just drinking their blood, then you have a whole ass body to deal with every time. So he's got like a circular saw and one of those sort of welding masks, I think it is. And he is cutting the body into parts so that it's going to be a little bit more manageable to get rid of. And it's just a wild thing to imagine Guillermo, of all people, being able to handle this. And it's not like it is without effect, because he has to stop and take a breath because it's clearly like grossing him out a little bit. But he's still doing it though, you know? And I gotta ask you guys, let's say you got into the best shape of your life. You looked amazing. You felt amazing. You could be transformed now into a vampire at your absolute peak. But in order to live, you would have to kill people, actual people. What would you do? Could you do that? Because I can understand why a lot of folks would feel that that was a fair trade. It does not surprise me at all that there would be people out there willing to do that. Not even a little, but I don't know that I could do that. I mean, there's this, everybody always has this sort of like, I'd only kill the bad people. I'd only kill people that deserve to die. No, you wouldn't. If you're a vampire, you get hungry and you just have to deal with whatever you've got. We're not Dexter, right? We're not going to go and find police profiles of people that we suspect are guilty of heinous crimes and only hunt them down for sustenance. That's a full-time job. People aren't doing that. So you'd have to be okay with just attacking randoms in a park. Can you live with that? I don't know, man. It's one thing. In Twilight, Edward hates himself so much because he considers himself a monster. And he did that sort of thing where he could read people's minds. So he would only target people who were killers, rapists, pedophiles, that kind of thing. And even so, it just wasn't enough. It didn't justify it enough to him. And that's from somebody who could literally read minds. If there's any doubt as to whether this person is actually guilty or whether they're unsavable, well, I don't know that I would be able to Anyway, Guillermo apparently isn't going to have a problem with that part. That doesn't seem to concern him in any way. So he goes to see Nandor in his coffin, and brings him a piece of mail that turns out to be the results of a 23andMe lab test of blood. And I loved this so much because Nandor wants to know where they got the DNA. Did they steal my semen like those witches did that one time? And I don't know why, but Nandor saying the word semen is really funny and upsetting in a way that I don't feel like anybody else's accent manages to get across. He is just particularly upsetting. And ends up with, but this seems much more above board. So Nandor tells him it's a way of finding out where you're from and how many living relatives you have. And he says, you have 200,000 direct living descendants. So, of course, Genghis Khan comes to mind, and he gets brought up a bunch later on, especially by Colin, to sort of put Nandor back in his place, even though 200,000 is truly insane. He's a great granddad times 30. And Nandor is delighted by this. I wasn't sure whether or not this was going to be something that he was happy with or not. I wouldn't know. I don't have a good idea as to what problem he'd have with it. But, for the sake of comedy, they might be able to come up with something. And instead, he's really gratified. And there's one woman that's living nearby who's older. And I love this because he talks about her as if she's a child and brings her a toy. And the whole thing is very much an old man going to see this little girl for the first time. And then we find out that she is very old. And the sight of him floating outside of her window, unsurprisingly, causes her to drop dead of a heart attack. But we are not quite there yet. It's classic, though. I loved it. He said that he had 37 wives, and when he got turned, they did not like the changes he was going through. Sleeping all day and mainly drinking people's blood while I was awake. It was putting a strain on us, and they all left. And he says it was a sad night for me because I really loved 35 of them. So in those days, parents didn't the father wasn't responsible for the children. The wives are the ones who took care of children. And now I'm realizing I had no idea what was going on, and I didn't keep track of any of them. So he says that what was it? He says, I did try to visit them, but they were afraid, because I'm a vampire floating outside the window. Hey, kitties. And he's got his hands up. Hey, you've got my nose. He's doing this scary thing. And then he just goes ahead and does that again. Just even though he knows that they were very frightened by this the first time, he's like, why don't I just attempt that exact same methodology again? So then we go to everybody else who is finding out about their history. And the only person who actually wants to know is Colin Robinson, who it turns out is white. That's all it says, is literally just white, which I cannot get enough of, honestly. Look, white people everywhere. I know that there's a certain amount of hoping that you will have something slightly more exotic in your bloodline that you can then center as if it's a major part of your identity. Don't do it. Don't do it. Okay? Just don't do it. You're probably mostly British or German, Irish, French. It's fine. Nobody cares, like just don't do it. It turns out have something like 17% native blood, but I have no idea what tribe or anything. And I'm assuming it's a South American tribe anyway, because I'm guessing that almost all of that comes from my father's side. So there's nothing to be done really with that information. It's pretty much what I expected. I'm 80% white. And then I've got a 20% native or, the 17% native and 3% Asian, which probably is somehow tied in with the native as well. But yeah, so it's just don't do it. And the fact that Colin Robinson just gets white, I wish that was a thing so that some people would just shut up about it. Who cares? So this is when, Nandor is trying to get them to listen to the information, and Nadja is like, where did you get our DNA without us knowing? And he's like, you leave it absolutely everywhere. That it was not hard. And she wants him to burn it. Laszlo, same thing. I found that extremely interesting. It seems like they're more reacting to the fact that he did this without consulting them first, but I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it than that, if there was something else going on where it was I have something in my history that I don't want you or anyone else knowing about specifically. Anyway, so that's the main scene of, them all finding out their information. And then we have Guillermo finding out that he is related to Van Helsing. And I'll tell you what, guys, I have not read the original Dracula. I should probably, but I have listened to enough podcasts covering the book that I feel pretty much like I've got the broad strokes, and the book itself sounds like it's actually kind of boring. And I've also watched was it Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula? It was extremely close to the actual plot of the book, and because of that, extremely ridiculous. And Owen loved it. I found it to be a bit much. However, I can't deny that it is, as close an adaptation as is out there. And because of listening to these podcasts and watching the movie, I found out something that I didn't know, which was that Van Helsing is part of the original story. I thought Van Helsing was an ancillary character that got maybe not even created by the original author, but maybe was, brought into the story via some other vehicle. And finding out that he was canon from the beginning was really surprising and interesting to me. And Guillermo's trying to convince himself, but he's not real, right? Van Helsing wasn't a real guy. And he's like, well, wait, maybe because his whole thing is, I didn't think vampires were real. So why would I, like, and they are, so why would I just not believe that Van Helsing is real? And then he thinks about how he has accidentally very recently killed 2 vampires, not 1, but 2. And I'll tell you what, I didn't see this coming. I really enjoy the fact that those 2 vampire deaths turn out to be a setup for an ongoing thing that Guillermo's going to be going through. And not only is he going through this, but he's not going to be telling anybody about it. I'm pretty confident he isn't going to say a word to anybody. I love this because watching Guillermo just get shit on, don't get me wrong, there is a lot of that is truly funny. But it's going to get old, and it's going to be like frustrating in a way that's no longer fun. And I couldn't think what else they could do with this guy. I was like, either you're going to have him continue to be this put upon dude, or you're going to have him continuing to get resentful. And what will that look like? Will he start to act out or, like sabotage them? Or you're going to have him get turned, which doesn't feel like what you would want to do with a character that just is such a fun human touchstone for the audience. This is genius. Have him be related to somebody who historically killed vampires, and that was like the whole thing. Have him be constantly second guessing himself about his own intentions and abilities. I think this is just a stroke of brilliance, and I cannot wait to see how they decide to build on this in the next season, because what a great way to end this season. It just set up all of these possibilities. I'm deeply into it. And his acting in the moment when he realizes, and he's thinking about how his stomach is bothering him, and then realizes that he had garlic for lunch. Oh my God. Laszlo, we go to him here. And he's talking about the day that Nadja came to his window and how he was so unhappy before she came into his life. And so now he is creating this like topiary, and he is trying to get it to stay upright and has this tether that he needs to attach to something. And he turns around, and Guillermo is standing there with wooden garden stakes. And he freaks out at seeing this. I loved this too, because I sort of expected that if they ever saw him with something like this, that there would be a real sort of like, dude, what are you doing? Like a very low-key response about it. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, no, what they're doing is they're acting as if he sees Guillermo standing there with like a loaded gun. And that feels a lot more appropriate, just this like, you're literally holding on to one of the few things that could instantly end my life. And you're just so casual. You're just standing there with it. What are you fucking doing? What are you thinking? What a great way to start things out. And he calls him a fucking half-wit. And I felt so bad. Poor Guillermo. So they wind up tying this tether around a tree trunk in order to hold up the topiary, which winds up being very important later on. So we go back to Nandor. He goes to the relative's house and causes her to drop dead of a heart attack. And then he decides that he wants to attend her funeral. But the thing is, her funeral is, of course, being held in a church. And I say, of course, but I guess it could be held in just a funeral home. So he has to convince his friends to go into this church with him. And they agree to do it, even knowing that it's going to actually physically hurt them. Which honestly, I feel like is a really sort of touching thing for them to do. I feel like this could be seen as just a joke. But when you think about like them being willing to accept pain and harm, even if the harm isn't going to be permanent, I don't know that I would have a lot of friends that would be willing to do that. You know, that's really, I think, a mark of true friendship between all of them. I love the conversation about goading that he has with Colin Robinson. And for her part, Nadja is like, see, this is the reason that it's not smart to get attached to humans, because they die so quickly. They're gone so quickly. And it's part of the trouble with Gregor. Every time he comes back, our love is reunited, and then he is brutally decapitated. And I love this so much. She is looking at all of these different like drawings of him. There is this moment, there's one where he's like bent over and she's like pointing at his ass going, num, 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 num. Oh my God, Nadja, never change, please, ever. As she's looking through all of these drawings, she begins to sing to him, like singing about how much she misses him. And Gregor, can you hear me? And then we get to see him on this, like in a wing of what looks like a like high security mental hospital, because he's like strapped into a chair. He hears her singing. He snaps the neck of the orderly in the room, grabs the uniform off of this guy, or not even the uniform. He grabs the shoes off of him and busts through a wall and jumps off the side of the building and steals a car. Like, it is amazing to watch. He is on it. And just because she started singing, this connection between the two of them, I am loving this. There is something so, like, this really feels like it's sort of tied to the storyline of the original Dracula story, where, what was her name? Katrina? Was it Katrina? But it's supposed to be sort of implied that she's like his old lover in a new body, but it's like probably her spirit, you know, and that she has reincarnated and she looks really similar to somebody that he used to be in love with and might actually be that person, because there's a response that she has to Dracula that feels like it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not logical, but there's something in her that's drawn to him. And somehow he's the only one out of the two of them who really knows, because he's still alive. He's experiencing the same life. And it makes sense because, like, when we first meet this version of Gregor, he doesn't actually remember who Nadja is until she, like, uses a certain weird power that she has to like summon forth the old memories that he used to have. But yeah, I just really, really love this. So we'll see what happens with him a little bit later, but we go to the funeral here. And first of all, I love the fact that Guillermo manages to get the funeral moved back into the evening by calling in a bomb scare. And all the men, I should say, except for Colin Robinson, so I guess just two men, they are wearing top hats, which I just adore. It's not even really like a top hat. I think Nandor is wearing something that's like a toque. It sort of looks like, I'm not really sure what you would call it, because it doesn't have a brim. Colin Robinson has no problem with going into a church because he finds it a feeding ground, since there's a lot of like emotion and whatnot. And he feels very irritated at the fact that he's being told low key that he's not really allowed to feed, although he's probably still going to do it. They go in and sit down and gently smoke in the back row and cry blood. And they sit for as long as they can take it. Nadja and Laszlo eventually are just like, yo, dude, I'm sorry, I really can't do this. And she stands up and says, it's a lovely service, but I'm on fire, and holds up one of her hands. Colin just says he would rather go because he would watch TV. He would rather watch TV. And Nandor stays for another like minute. He begins to light on fire, and fucking Guillermo attempts to help him by dousing him with water, but it is holy water, which could have potentially killed him. And Nandor, there are some times where he is willing to sort of overlook things. This does not turn out to be one of those times. So yeah, Laszlo and Nadja go home. They go to sleep pretty quickly because they are injured and they need to recover from what they just went through. And we check in here with what's going on with escapee Gregor. And I love this. There's a couple of kids that look like they're filming like maybe a TikTok or something. And they see this car that comes like peeling around the corner with like a tire out. And there's one rim that's like shooting sparks. And he gets thrown out through the front windshield and sits straight up with no problem. And goes and steals a motorbike while screaming her name. And then takes off on that. And he takes off moments before the cops get there for the accident. And it's just remarkable how fast his progression is. He hears her, he stands outside her house and calls her name, and Nadja hears him, and she comes out. She's got the blood all over her face. I heard your call. My destiny has brought me here, and it is to be with you. And she tries to tell him, you shouldn't be here. I have a very dangerous husband who lives here also. And Laszlo comes out, and it turns out he already knows about Gregor. I adore this. I love this so much. He says, I should cut your head off. And she's like, you don't need to do that. And he says, I always have. Outward appearance may have changed, but he's the same guy. You always reappear, and I am always the one to cut your head off. And then we get to see some of the drawings and paintings of Gregor getting decapitated, but we see a fuller picture, and Laszlo's face has been inserted into the drawings, and it's a great idea. I love this so much. And Gregor just says, when I was a street thief, I had the cleaver in my hand. When I was a naval officer, I was on board that ship. When I was atop that horse in the battlefield, yeah, that was me. The Amazon explorer, guess who tipped off the natives? When I was a mouse, I was the cat. I adore this. And he tells Nadja, every time this doughboy, is what he calls him, turns up, you start crying. You are my sweet baby, and I'm here to stop that kind of jive. Honestly, I love this so much. It could have been played as just, I am jealous of this guy, and look, Gregor is fine as fuck. Any man would be right to be a little jealous of Gregor, okay? And it could have been that simple. But framing it as, this dude never, makes you happy. Having him in your life never makes you feel better. You're always super sad. And I'm like, all right, maybe she's super sad because you kill him? But it does seem like every incarnation that he's in, there seems to be an obstacle to the two of them being together. I don't know. But essentially, I really like the overall idea. And I love Gregor standing to the side and saying, this is fucked up. Laszlo offers to kill him here. And Nadja's like, can you just give him one full life where he doesn't get decapitated, please? My wife has everything she needs with me. So you're not getting this chance again. Do not darken our doorstep again. And I really love, he says, maybe I'll see you in the next life to Nadja. In the background, Laszlo says, yeah, maybe you won't. And she goes up to him and whispers, maybe you will. Even now, even knowing that Laszlo is aware, Nadja can't let go. She's still like, ooh, but you are so damn fine, though. And honestly, I get it, girl. I really do. So this is when he gets on his motorbike to leave, as Laszlo is unveiling the topiary that he has done of Nadja. And Gregor, rides his bike away and doesn't see that there is a wire holding this topiary up. And he rides his bike under it, and it is exactly throat level, and cuts his head off. And I fell the fuck over. This is the kind of thing that I would expect myself to see coming, because I often can spot these little setups, ahead of time. I didn't see this coming at all. I was so distracted at the whole reveal of the fact that Laszlo knew the whole time. And it was just so perfect. It was so well thought out. It was done really well for it to be at night so that we couldn't really see the cord either. And I just, the timing of it and how sudden and abrupt it is. Oh my God. It was just, and the fact that the motorbike keeps going for another couple of yards before it just topples over. And Laszlo is I'll leave you to have a few moments alone with him. She picks up his head that is still inside the helmet and just says, I'll see you soon. And I was just oh my God, what even is this show? So then we have Guillermo and Nandor together. Nandor wants to know what the deal is with Guillermo because he's acting weird. He's asking if everything is okay. And, Guillermo keeps insisting that he is fine. He is asked who his ancestors were, and he says, typical Mexican piñata farmers. Nandor, that's nothing to be ashamed of. People love piñatas. Someone's got to breed those colorful donkeys. Ah, my God, what? So Nandor lays down in the coffin, and he's thanking Guillermo for his help, but also yelling at him for pouring holy water. And he still has burns on his body. And says, that is one demerit point for you, and yet one more year as my familiar. And Guillermo has a look on his face of the kind of rage that I don't feel like we've truly gotten to see yet on this show. He has been upset. He has been angry and resentful. This moment, especially when Nandor reaches up and taps him on the nose, Guillermo looks like he is about to end a bitch's life. It is truly a kind of rage that I was you know what? I didn't feel like Guillermo could be that intimidating, but I'm starting to rethink that because this look he's given him, ooh, yikes. And Nandor notices and asks if he was having a serious thought. Nandor is so fucking dismissive here. Guillermo says no, and Nandor says, oh yeah, you probably weren't. Nandor, I am going to need you to chill the fuck out with that, sir, because you are about to get got. And Guillermo closes the lid, but he takes a minute after he has put all of the candles out and turned the lights out. he is walking back into the house with all of those wooden stakes that he's putting back into the Amazon box that he got them from. And you see him pick a couple of them up, looking at them like he is really considering something. And shudders as he realizes what he's thinking, sort of tosses them as if to like get them out of his hands, and they go flying across the room and land exactly in the hearts of the portraits of Nandor, Nadja, and Laszlo. And the episode just like, there's just this long pause where we just get to look at Guillermo's face as he looks at the camera in utter panic at what this might be saying about him. And then, interestingly, we are outside the house looking at the front of the house, and all of these crows start cawing and gathering around the house, which last episode, or no, the episode before for the trial, signified that they were like getting called in like to a summit of all of the like, you know, senior vampires, basically. And I can't tell if this is related to what's going on with Guillermo and they're like swarming because they have figured something out and they're trying to like warn their people, or if it's because they escaped from what was supposed to be a death sentence and we are actually getting a follow-up to that. Because I really thought that we weren't getting a follow-up and it was just going to be accepted that, yeah, they got out of it and nobody really cared to pursue it, which I would be fine with, but also deciding to follow up on that would make me pretty happy. I would be willing to let it go. But if they decide that they're going to try for some real continuity and actually deal with the consequences of that, it seems like a smart move to me, you know? But that's how the episode ends, and that's how the season ends. And I truly don't, like, I feel like there is something that is supposed to be implied from this, and I don't know what, like, I can't decide if it was supposed to be something that I know and get as a viewer, because I was able to, like, you know, put it together from the information of this season, or if it is just supposed to be kind of like a twist that, oh, shit is beginning to pop off and wait till you see what it is. And it's just meant to be like a sort of generic cliffhanger of, you know, shit's brewing. I can't decide. And I don't know what I like want to happen with Guillermo's lineage and the way this factors in. Because so here's the thing. I don't know how many of y'all have seen Steven Universe, but there is an episode where he participates in this like underground wrestling ring thing. And there is somebody he's friends with who is a fan and doesn't know that Steven participates, that he's one of the fighters, because he does it in disguise. So his friend is like sharing his opinions very freely with Steven about if the show tonight was any good or not, because he doesn't know he's talking to a performer from the show. And Steven starts to change what he does based on the feedback he's getting from his friend, and eventually does exactly what the friend asked for. And his friend is still not happy with it or satisfied with it. And Steven is just like, I don't get it. You got exactly what you wanted and you're still not happy. And his friend just kind of blows and goes, I don't know what I want. And that is the best example, in my opinion, of addressing like the fandom pressure to take things in certain directions. When I say what I would like to see happen, I really want it to be clear. I always have an asterisk after that sentence. It is what I think I want to see happen, because I am limited to this kind of imagination, whatever it is that I thought of. That is not to say that you couldn't think up something way more interesting and better than what I just came up with, and truly surprise me with it, because I don't know what I want a lot of the time. And there are so many properties out there, especially lately, because I feel like Spoil Me has given a lot of folks an opportunity to expose me to different like stories that are a little bit off the beaten path. And they're off the beaten path sometimes, I think, because they don't follow the tropes people expect. And so I think more than we want to admit, people enjoy tropes. It comforts them to know a little bit where we're going with this, you know? And so I think there are some books that deserved to get more popular than they did. And that maybe some of it is because they were so full of surprises and subversions that people were a little uncomfortable with it, you know? And because of Spoil Me, I've gotten exposed to a lot more surprise endings or subversions of like a certain character trope or whatever. And I realize how limited I am because of tropes that exist that I just assume that's what we're going to do. And I don't even realize I am making that assumption. I don't even know I'm doing it until it doesn't happen. And I have to examine why I'm so surprised at the, you know, at the left turn this all took. Why do I feel so shocked? And I eventually come to the conclusion it's because I had a very like clear idea of what I expected, even if I wasn't really acknowledging that to myself. All that said, to really get down to the fact that when I think about where I would like things to go with Guillermo, I really want to emphasize that the creators of this show and the writers of this show have my trust. I do not believe that I am going to come up with a better idea than the people who create this show. And I know that it may sound really pompous to say this, but I don't like give that trust away often. There are so many things that I've watched that I was like, oh my God, I could write, like I can think off the top of my head of 3 more interesting directions this could go. And it can be really frustrating, you know? This is a show where they have continually taken things in interesting different directions that I didn't see coming, that I wouldn't have thought of. And they've done really hilarious bits even within those subjects where if you told me what the subject of the episode was, I would think, all right, we're going to do this, this, and that. And none of those things gets done. Or I may think of a type of direction and they do it exactly, but the way they do it is so well timed, well written, and well delivered that even if I saw the joke coming, it still makes me laugh because these actors are amazing comedians. Just everything about how they each handle their characters is so distinctive and so considered that I have rewatched almost every episode so far, and I always laugh at the same places because the delivery is just that fucking on point. And there's just a little bit of like a delay before somebody says something, and that change in timing makes it feel fresh. It just, So when I talk about like what I'd like to see going forward with Guillermo's storyline, especially, even if I had a clear idea of it, I wouldn't be boxing myself in and saying, if this doesn't happen, then I'm going to be really disappointed with the season. That's not it at all. I'm just sort of like trying to imagine not only a place that we could go with this that's unexpected, but getting to see changes happening with Guillermo, because you want to see some character growth, even in a comedy, right? It doesn't matter that it's like, we don't have to do a high drama to enjoy watching changes and development and maybe maturity of certain characters. But part of what makes Guillermo so special is the fact that he feels really relatable. Like he feels like one of us. That's the point. He's the human touchstone. So you don't want to lose that, but you do kind of want him to be empowered. You don't want to just watch this poor guy get repeatedly like degraded. And how do you balance that? How do you keep him relatable while not having him be a complete pushover? And I think they've managed to really balance that this season, where he has been a pushover, but we're seeing a response to that finally in these last few episodes of him, first of all, realizing that he's being used, because it was very clear initially he thought he was so lucky and genuinely believed that he was about to be, like, he was on the cusp of being transformed finally. And as the season goes on, he not only begins to see how much of a non-entity he is to Nandor, because Nandor thinks that he's like at a 2-year anniversary and it's actually 10, but also begins to meet up with other familiars and realizes like how little they are cared about and how many of them have been promised so many things but never gotten it. And it's like a multi-level marketing scheme in a lot of ways. You know, you tell people if they just work hard enough and if they cared enough, they would be able to get here too, but they just haven't managed to prove themselves yet. And him completely falling for that, but then starting to look around him. Really, really good start. But now we have added in this extremely interesting little side issue of the Van Helsing thing. And it doesn't feel like he is in control of himself. That's what I find really interesting. Like, every time that the first 2 times that he kills a vampire, one of them is a pure accident. He just opens a door, doesn't know that the Baron is standing right there. Pure accident. The second one, he is defending himself. He is actually trying to stop a vampire from hurting him. So it escalates a little bit there, where it's not that he was trying to do harm necessarily, but he did try and stop a vampire from doing something. This last, moment in this episode, he has managed to stake their portraits completely unintentionally. And the flinging of the stakes looked almost like it was an involuntary movement. So what it seems like is being suggested here is that there is like a latent part of his bloodline that compels him to try and kill vampires, that he has been somehow I don't know the word, if it's repressing or if it's just that it was dormant until recently. And that I think here's my theory, that this desire to kill vampires was dormant within him because of his adoration. It didn't get activated. And then as time has gone on and his resentment and anger towards the vampires that he works for has grown, that dormant seed is starting to germinate. And maybe it will be sort of beyond his control by the time things wind, I don't know how far it could go or how angry he has to get. But, in the moment that he stakes all of their portraits, he is a kind of angry that we haven't really seen from him. And I don't think that's an accident. It feels like maybe they're going to have to start to watch their step around him. And will they ever find out? Because I have said I don't think he intends to tell them, and I certainly don't. But is there a way for them to find out themselves by accident? I don't feel like they care enough about him to actually investigate. So I don't think they'll find out. I think he'll be able to keep the secret unless his actions really start to take over his body in a way that he can't control right in front of them. And I'm extremely interested in seeing whether or not that happens, because what happens if Guillermo gets kicked out? How would that do we get to keep watching him? What would that even do? I genuinely don't know if that would help the show or hurt it, because I feel like it might be kind of interesting to have him go off on his own and be taken out of this like really weird scenario that he's gotten used to over the past 10 years, but still be like coping with the fact that he knows vampires exist and that he has this heritage. And also they would have to get a new familiar, and who would they choose and what would that look like as well? And would Guillermo try and warn them? Would he talk to the familiar and be like, hey, dude, I know that you might think that XYZ is going to happen, but I worked for them for 10 years and never saw shit, so don't get your hopes up? Or would he just look at the poor sap and be like, yeah, I was like that once, and not even try, because he knows he wouldn't have listened if somebody tried to tell him that, you know? Anyway, I have gone on a lot about Guillermo, but the vampires, they feel like they aren't going to develop as much because they have been alive for so long. So I feel like who we see is who they are. And that's not to say that they can't develop. The writers can do whatever they want. But as a viewer, I see them as like a constant in the background in a way. And Guillermo as like, in a lot of ways, a main character, because he is the one that is being shaped and changed by what's happening. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just like really interested in him in particular because of that. Also, I kind of thought that we were going to have another check-in with our friend Vivi. I can't remember her name. Jenna? I think it might have been Jenna, who got transformed into a vampire by Nadja, and we don't get one before the end of the season. So I don't know if like her final lessons where she kills her first dude was supposed to be the last time we ever saw her. But I would kind of like to, you know, touch base with her again and see what's going on with her, just out of curiosity. All right, I had better wrap up. I'm not quite at time, but I really feel like I covered everything I wanted to for this episode, and I'm only a few minutes short. So hopefully Ashley will forgive me for that. And I'm really enjoying the show. I hope that I'm able to continue this one. I'm looking at, there's only one more episode booked for this Friday for the first episode of season 2. And after that, it doesn't look like there's anything more booked. And I am currently booked into February of next year. So if they don't get booked pretty soon, I may have to just end coverage of this show, which I have like very mixed feelings about, because on the one hand, it would be such a bummer, but on the other hand, I would get to watch them all on my own time, which would be really fun. But I just wanted to give you guys all a warning about that. I know finding slots can be really hard, but there is a reason why a long break, like after 3 months, I don't continue coverage, because I begin to lose track of things after a while. I cover so many properties. So I just wanted to give you guys a warning about that. And this Friday will be the last episode that I record before going on my vacation. So if you listen to other Spoil Me's or other Unspoileds, there won't be anything new for about 3 weeks, and that is why. So just, you know, try not to miss me too much. And thank you all very much for being supportive throughout all of this. And, you know, if you want to become a patron and find a bunch of back catalogs of all kinds of other content to tide you over until I get back, you can go to patreon.com/unspoiled. And there is, I've been talking about coverage of Twilight. I think it was really fun. Miles and I covered that together. And I think that we managed to really like strike a balance between genuinely enjoying some parts of the material while being critical of certain things that are extremely problematic. And I'm rather proud of the way we managed it. So check that out if you're looking for something extra. All right, I'm wrapping. Thank you again so much. And I will be seeing you Friday with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.